Hello everyone and welcome back to Mossy Bottom, my homestead here in the west of Ireland. It's mid-February and just like I did back in July last year, I'm going to attempt to show you a day in my life so you can get a taste of what it's like living on an Irish smallholding. Except this being winter, that's going to look very, very different to how it did back in the summer. For a start, it gets dark around 5 p.m. here, it was around 4 p.m. in January, so the days are very short. It also rains much more than in the summer. We don't have those typically dry, freezing winters here in Ireland, which I think you do in most of continental Europe and North America. Instead, we have very wet, very windswept winters with enormous storms blowing in off the Atlantic Ocean. In fact, this is the day after Storm Eunice, which wreaked havoc here in Ireland with winds of 200 kilometers an hour in places. Fortunately for me, it affected the southern counties more than the northern ones. So Sligo, where I live, has gotten off quite lightly. Unlike, though, I have to say, some of the big storms from previous winters, which have hit me very hard. There has been damage though on my smallholding, and I'll be tackling that later in the day. But first, it's just after 9 a.m. As you can hear, the wind is still raging, but the sun has at least come out and the rain has stopped. So the first job of the day, as always, is checking on, letting out in some cases, and feeding my 30 or so animals. They've already lived through many storms over the years, so this is nothing new to most of them at least. But I have to admit, in the night, when the caravan's shaking, and it really does, and the trees are creaking, I do always worry about them. Because it's now February, we're approaching a time of the year called the Hungry Gap, which is a period in late winter and early spring when there's very little growing which you can harvest. I've depleted most of my root vegetables like carrots and beetroot and swedes, but there are still some Brussels sprouts, and what I tend to do is snap the heads off. You see there's some mini sprouts left on there, which the chickens love. And of course there's plenty of kale, which is a great survivor during the winter. This may be the middle of winter, but kale is something that's never in short supply here on my smallholding. If you choose the right varieties, like this Siberian kale, you'll have it right through the year. Not only do my rabbits, pigs, chickens, ducks, most of my animals love this stuff, but I'm quite partial to it too. And it's great to be able to get the nutrition of fresh greens even in the winter. The pigs have been digging up and feeding voraciously on roots and have, as you can see, turned this area behind me, which was overgrown with brambles and nettles and other weeds back in the summer, into a veritable mosh pit over the last month or two, which is of course just what I want them to do, because in the spring I then got nice, clear, weed-free soil to broadcast sow, in this case native wildflower seeds, This is a south-facing slope, and as drab and colourless, well, brown as it may look now, believe me, in 6 months' time, this place is going to be alive with colour and insects. Pig, 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 pig. It's not an overstatement to say there is a huge difference in rural Ireland between the summer and the winter in terms of the land. We don't tend to get much snow here, which I suppose blankets most inland countries and hides that inevitable decay of nature that you get in the winter. In Ireland there is still plenty of green, this being the Emerald Isle of course, but it doesn't have that magical shimmer which reappears with the daffodils, I suppose, in March or April. For me, winter in the west of Ireland is a time to imagine what the land will once again turn into in the spring, and I suppose to contemplate all the exciting projects and developments in the coming year. One of the really great things about this time of year is that I can let the ducks out to free range, which I love doing. They have a natural instinct to come back to their home where they sleep and feed, but free ranging them allows them to pick off all those slugs and the eggs of the slugs, which mean that in the spring and the summer I don't get nearly as much slug damage on my vegetable crops. Of course, if you let the ducks free range when you've got young vegetables that have been planted out, then they will pick at them and damage them, so you can't do that. The key is letting them out at the right time of year so they eat all the slugs but don't damage your vegetables. Good boy, Moss. So that's all the animals let out and fed, and they're all fine, so I definitely feel relieved because it was quite a storm that hit last night. There is quite a bit of damage. A lot of my membranes have been ripped up, which I'll need to fix. The fence has been ripped off, and there's quite a few big branches from trees that have come down, including one in the field behind me. But before I get to that, I'm going to go for a walk with Moss, relax, throw a few sticks for him, and then I'll get to work. Come on, Moss. You can see behind me a few trees have come down in the storm. That's normal. And it's interesting, I think, that Sitka spruce plantations like this are much maligned. They're hated by people as being biodiverse deserts that just don't support life. But I think that's mostly from people who don't spend any time in them. The problem isn't the spruce plantation, it's the fact that it's constantly being cut down. Because when it's cut down, the species that have adapted to it, the birds, the insects, the mammals, of course the mushrooms and the plants, they all have to reset and find somewhere else. That constant cycle of planting, cutting, replanting, cutting, replanting, that's terrible for biodiversity. But the spruce trees in and of themselves create a rich environment for wildlife, particularly around the perimeter. And if you actually get into a mature spruce plantation, you'll see that. This one is full of red squirrels and pine martens, badgers come in here, and foxes, rabbits, deer, not to mention all the species of plant and mushroom. It really is rich in life, but as soon as it's cut down, I fear all of that's going to change. Moss will still love it though, I'm sure. So I fed the animals and had some breakfast, usually porridge on a cold day like this. And now, while the sun is out, well, kind of out behind the cloud, I want to try and get some of those jobs done and tackle some of that storm damage. The first thing I want to do is repair the windbreak that you can see behind me, which was badly torn overnight by Storm Eunice. Wind in the west of Ireland is a major consideration if you want to grow things outside, including trees, because it's such a stormy country. I put up this windbreak to try and protect my fruit trees in my forest garden here, but I have to say it really hasn't worked. I think I've had maybe half a dozen apples in 3 years from the trees in this area. The blossom, unfortunately, just gets blown off every spring because we still have strong winds right the way into the summer. I'm hoping that the western red cedar hedge, which I've planted and is now 3 years old, will help solve that problem when it gets a bit taller and thicker and reaches maturity. This is a great example, I think, of problems on a small holding having intuitive solutions. The netting of this windbreak abrades against the fence post because it's not exactly flush against it, and it causes it to tear. In previous years I used pieces of wood like this to clamp on the netting, but because it's not quite flush against the posts aren't exactly even, that causes it to tear as well with cumulative storms, which is where the foam comes in, and this is just a scrap piece of foam which I got for free. Using that as a clamp holds the netting onto the post and prevents it from slipping and abrading, which would cause it to tear. So I found these things are very, very effective. So as you can see, the storm has really ripped up some of the membrane that I have here and thrown the stones all over the place. And I need to fix that now. The reason that I use membrane, people often ask me that, is first of all because it stops weed growth during the winter, and weeds do still grow here during the winter, the dormant season. It also is water permeable, so it allows the rain to soak through, and under the membrane I always put a layer of compost and wood chips, and the bacteria and worms that exist under there break that down and integrate it into the soil, which is of course helped by the membrane because being black it absorbs the sunlight and creates a warmer environment which allows the bacteria to thrive. So it's really good for the soil, for enriching and supporting the health of the soil, because it also stops nitrogen leaching, which is where the sunlight causes nitrogen, which is one of the most important nutrients for plant growth, to leach out into the atmosphere. If you put membrane down like this, it prevents that. Yes, it is a plastic, but it's not a single-use plastic. These rolls I will use for decades, and they play a vital role, I think, in an organic small holding like this. These, incidentally, are the beginnings of new life. Daffodil bulbs that are sprouting forth. Most of them I am of course going to leave, but there was a few under the tarp which had managed to spread under there where I want to plant my vegetables in the spring, but it's a good sign. It means spring isn't far away. You can see that one of my cats, Griselda, has caught a mouse, and she's probably about to eat it whole. She normally does. And you may think that's a bit brutal, somewhat cruel, but cats are a fantastic way on a small holding or a farm to control the rodent problem. Keeping cats means that I don't have to use poison, I don't have to use traps, and I get to have the pleasure of their company while they get to eat and hunt in an entirely natural way. Of course, I do supplement their diet with cat food as well. Okay folks, it's about 1 o'clock, time for lunch. Normally I would have eggs for lunch from my own chickens, but because it's winter and my chickens don't lay between about late October and March, I don't have fresh eggs right now, but I do have frozen eggs in the form of this spätzle, which I was taught to make, and it's basically a mixture of flour and eggs and beetroot, which forms a kind of pasta. And I had the foresight this year to freeze a lot of this back in the autumn, so my chest freezer is full of these little boxes full of spätzle for just this occasion in the winter when I don't have any eggs myself. So I'm going to make that with some of my home canned tomatoes from my own tomatoes grown in the polytunnel. They've done exceptionally well, by the way. With, in addition, some scarlet elf cup mushrooms, which I was able to forage from my strawberry beds, which are actually hugel mounds, so there's a lot of rotting wood under there, which means that I get every winter this abundant crop of mushrooms which grow on that wood as it decays, which is wonderful, I think, because in the summer, of course, I get the fresh strawberries, and then in the winter I get this extra bonus crop of mushrooms on the same piece of land. Okay folks, I finished my lunch. I feel much warmer, which is nice. I'm back outside and the wind has completely subsided. Apart from the remaining damage, you wouldn't know there'd ever been a storm at all. It's the one thing about the weather in Ireland, it is so capricious and changeable. Literally from one minute to the next, it can be completely different. So, there are two main jobs during the winter at Mossy Bottom, and they both have to do with trees. One of them is coppicing to produce wood chips for my compost, which is essential for adding nutrients back into the soil to grow vegetables. And pruning, of course, is part of that. And the other main job for me is chainsawing and wood splitting. And of course I don't own any forestry here at Mossy Bottom, but I do have forestry all around my land. And of course I have a mature hedgerow which consists of elder, hawthorn, blackthorn, willow, alder and a few other native species. And every winter without fail, several of those trees get blown down in storms. It's happened every year since I've been here. And this winter is no exception. Storm Eunice has ripped off a few limbs from this elder tree, which you can see behind me. It borders the lane to my cottage. Luckily, in this case, those trees fell inwards onto my land and not outwards onto the road. During the worst winter storms, I have been trapped here for several days at a time due to trees coming down on that lane and blocking it, which of course I have to clear myself. I learned to use a chainsaw in Canada during my year volunteering there, on ranches and in lodges, and have been using one now for over a decade without a single accident. I was lucky enough to be trained by a professional during my time there in Canada, which gave me a real sense of confidence, especially using a small chainsaw like this Husqvarna 16-inch. It's perfect for this type of work and it consumes very little fuel relative to how much it gets done. No, Husqvarna are not sponsoring this video, I just really like my chainsaw. And I think in general a chainsaw, a small one, is a must-have on a homestead, unless of course you live in the desert. Once bucked into sections, I will split these logs with an axe and then store them for at least 2 years under cover before burning them in my stove. And you can burn wood from just about any tree, providing it's had adequate time to season. Unseasoned wood spits in the fire, it produces a lot of smoke, and it constantly goes out, so it requires just constant management every 5 minutes. So in terms of producing your own fuel, patience is an absolute must. For the first few years, you're probably going to be buying firewood on any new smallholding. But after that, you might be surprised how little land you actually need to produce a constant supply of fuel. I have just an acre of land with a perimeter of mature hedgerow, and that for me is enough to provide all my heating needs. I know here in Ireland, oil for central heating systems has gone up 50% in a single year. And is set to continue soaring in price. So managing your own trees for winter fuel is, I think at least, a really smart step for anyone on the self-sufficiency ladder. Well, that's the chainsawing finished. You can see I've got a pile of buck logs ready to split and a pile of branches and ivy ready to run through my wood chipper and turn into compost. And there's a few more piles just like that further up the lane. But in that time, the wind has once again picked up, as you can probably hear. I've read there's yet another named storm on the way, only a day after Storm Eunice. Worse though, while I was filming, my tripod was blown over and the camera is now refusing to turn on. So those with a keen eye will have noticed I'm now recording this on my phone. I've only had an actual camera since July of last year. Prior to that, everything was filmed on my phone. And I did consider putting this video on hold, but well, that's just life out here, isn't it? This is one of the windiest, wettest countries in Europe, if not the world. And filming outdoors, especially in the winter, is just full of hazards. I think there's a false impression that Ireland is a picture postcard country, and there are moments like that, but it's also wild and savage. Luckily, I like a challenge. I've only got a couple of hours left now before dark, so I'm going to take Moss for a run down the bog. It's been a few weeks since we last went, and it really is one of his favourite activities and a great chance for me too to relax and unwind a bit. I'm not sure if I will in this wind though. I'm not someone typically who enjoys just sitting in nature. I like being active. For me, that's therapeutic, and it always motivates me to do that next job or day's work. Of course, this being winter, you can't just do a lot. It's really limiting. But bit by bit, it's about enjoying the days and anticipating what's to come. As Kyle said in our recent interview, winter is a time in which nature encourages us to rest and recover for that next challenge. And I have to say, I absolutely love the idea that life changes from season to season. Not just the landscape around me, but the work I do, the things that I eat, my activity levels, everything about how I live. It's odd, I think, that contemporary society tries to eliminate that, instead valuing the ability to do anything and eat anything at any time of year, so that the seasons don't really matter anymore. Although we seek consistency and abundance year-round, it's not really part of our makeup or evolution. So why would it be something that makes us happy? Moss is an old pro now when it comes to bog mushing, as I like to call it. We've been coming here with my bike for years, and he knows the route off by heart at this stage. Of course, when he's tired, he lets me know, and I always listen and we have a rest, but generally speaking, Moss, like most border collies, is very high energy, and what he wants more than anything is to be given a job. Let's go, Moss. Good boy. Good boy. Let's go, Moss. Okay folks, I'm back at Mossy Bottom, here in the cabin. Moss is outside the door having a well-earned nap, and there's one final job that I wanted to get done today before settling down for the evening, and that's sorting through my potatoes. As you can see, they're all here in boxes, more than you can see on the camera. There's about 20-25 boxes left. This is my entire supply left from 2021. There were in total about 8 or 9 wheelbarrow loads, which I dug up progressively beginning in about August. But this being mid-February now, I'm down to about half as I've eaten the rest. And as the air is so humid here in Ireland, especially during the winter, they do regularly need checking for mould and any bad potatoes removing and adding to the compost so that they don't infect the others. Remember though, if you have blight in your potatoes, never add those to the compost. This is just regular indoor moulds caused by damp. I had a really successful crop last year. Just look at the size of these beauties, and I've got dozens like this. Potatoes are definitely my biggest single crop here at Mossy Bottom and an absolute staple of my diet. I eat them every day without fail, be it boiled, mashed, turned into chips. I love making homemade chips. Baked, of course, or even turned into a potato bread. I'm also going to take some of these small potatoes and boil them up for my pigs. Apart from their grains, the oats and barley and pig nuts, there isn't that much for them to eat at this time of year, so I like to spoil them from time to time. I think they earn it. They work very hard. Potatoes thrive here in Ireland precisely because it rains so often during the growing season, which prevents scab and encourages really big growth of those tubers. But keeping the potatoes fresh and mould-free during the winter is a job in itself, unlike in many inland countries where you just stick the potatoes in a root cellar and forget about them. You definitely can't do that here. Thankfully, having this cabin and my cats, of course, I no longer have to contend with those pesky rodents, mice and rats, taking bites out of my potatoes. That was a real heartbreak for several years, especially if rats get into them, because of course rats spread disease, and if there's any evidence of rats, you really have to get rid of the potatoes. You can see that some of these potatoes are beginning to shoot already, and of course I don't want that to happen. If you were to look at these in December or even January, there wouldn't have been any shoots, but because we're almost getting to the point of spring, the days are getting that bit longer and the temperature a tiny bit warmer, and the potatoes see that as a signal to start growing. The trick is to keep it as dark and as cool in here as possible. Finally I can sit down and relax a bit. In the evenings I might read or download a TV show. I'm a big fan of The Witcher right now, for anyone curious. But I also spend a lot of my time writing on my laptop, as I plan to tonight. I have what I call my cottage diary, which dates back to the very day that I moved in. I think I read some excerpts from it in another video. And it documents my progress as well as the discoveries and revelations that I have, and failures, of course, while living here. It's the self-learning, above all else, that I love about this life. I'm also in the process of writing my second book. The first was a fiction novel back in 2015, little known, I have to say, except by a few of my most ardent patrons after I mentioned it in one of my podcasts. Thank you, by the way, for the very nice reviews. You know who you are. But this latest endeavour will be a factual account of my life here, addressed, I suppose, to anyone who's interested in this way of life themselves, or perhaps even considering doing the same. I have no idea when it'll be finished, no time soon, but on these long winter evenings, it's only about 5:30 now, and already it's too dark to do anything outside. I'm definitely enjoying being able to sit down and write. I can definitely see myself as well as an old man tapping away contentedly on a keyboard, sat by a hearth. On that subject, people often ask me about retirement. What happens when I get to an age when I'm no longer physically able to run my homestead in the way that I do now? And I suppose You know, it is a very physical act keeping this place going, and it is inevitable at some point that that will happen. First of all, I should say I don't have a pension. That's not an option for me. The money I make through YouTube and of course your kind support, it all goes into projects here, either now or in the future, particularly the restoration of the cottage and outbuildings, which, by the way, you can expect a lot more updates on this coming year. But I do hope later in life, when I get to that point, that my creative work, be it writing or making videos, will hopefully give me just enough money to live. And I'm quite sure there'll still also be plenty of volunteers keen to do the more physical tasks in exchange for an opportunity to learn. I certainly have no shortage at this point. I know it's a cliche, but for me, life is just too short to waste worrying about what happens if. Okay folks, it's dinner time, which tonight is going to be, you've guessed it, homegrown potatoes, one big one, with home-caught mackerel. I caught that myself back in the summer. Apart from the butter and seasoning, an entirely home-produced meal, and in the dead of winter too. Today, I definitely got that feeling that spring is just around the corner, despite the storm which is still raging out there. The snowdrops are beginning to appear. There's one or two buds on the trees, and my early rhubarb has even started sprouting new leaves. Yes, people often ask me if I grow rhubarb. I do, and it does exceptionally well here. And spring, I have to say, is without doubt my favourite season here in Ireland. It fills me with excitement to welcome a new year of growth on my smallholding. What greater joy can there be than seeing your own little piece of the world sprout forth new life. At first a few tender shoots, but soon an explosion of vibrant greens and yellows. There really is nothing like it. Cheers everyone! Yes, this is also my strawberry wine. I better just have the one glass as I've still got the animals to put to bed. From me and Moss, who's out there, take care wherever you are in the world, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Oh, I was born in a Quaker town where folks worked good and hard for the ones they loved and God above. Each day they punched their card, and when evening came back home again, they'd rest a while and say, "'Tis a hard old life, but for kids and wife we'll work as another day." When the sun rose low, back to work they'd go, singing on their way. Oh, for job and home